Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Reaching Higher New Hampshire's webinar on school vouchers here in New Hampshire and what you can expect next. Joining us today is Christina Pretorius, our Director of Policy, and Matt Girding, our Policy Analyst on our team. And then my name is Nicole Highmark, and I am the Executive Director of Reaching Higher New Hampshire. We know this week is really busy with activity at the legislature, as well as a crazy weather week. So we're recording this webinar so others can watch this at their convenience. But for a little bit of background before Christina really takes over and digs into all the details you need to know about school vouchers in New Hampshire, I just want to speak to Reaching Higher New Hampshire. And Reaching Higher New Hampshire is New Hampshire's Education Policy Resource Center. And all of our work and all of our engagement is really centered on the belief that all children deserve an honest, high quality and student-centered education that prepares them for college, careers, and life. And Reaching Higher New Hampshire provides and really aspires to this vision by providing decision makers, educators, communities, and students with the tools they need to deliver on that promise. So with that quick intro, I am going to pass the baton off to Christina, who is going to speak to school vouchers today.
All right, thanks so much, Nicole, and thank you everyone for being here. We really appreciate it. School vouchers are a very big topic in New Hampshire and a growing topic nationally. So it's exciting to have this time with you to really go over where we've been and really what we're expecting in the next year and beyond. So today we have four real main categories of what we're going to cover today: what we know about school vouchers in New Hampshire right now, the effect that school vouchers have on students and on communities, what's next for them in New Hampshire. So, you know, we've just started a new legislative session. So what are lawmakers considering in the next session and beyond? And then how to get involved. So there are a number of bills in the House and in the Senate that lawmakers are considering, and they're always seeking public input. So how can you get involved? How can you make your voice heard? We'll go over a little bit of that as well. And so, you know, since we've only got an hour, we're going to jump right in. We've got a lot to cover. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section. Nicole and Matt Girding, our policy analyst, will be moderating that. And so if you have any questions, drop them in. If it's something that we need to look up or need some more research on, we'll get back to you. But feel free to drop stuff in the Q&A. And like Nicole said, this will be recorded, so it will be available for viewing for later as well. All right, so looking at where we are right now, what are school vouchers? School vouchers in New Hampshire, you'll hear them by a number of different names, whether it is a school voucher, education freedom accounts, EFAs. Sometimes they're also referred to as education savings accounts. EFAs and ESAs are really just different names for the same thing. They are taxpayer-funded personal accounts that parents can use to pay for education-related expenses. So for parents who opt in for a school voucher, they have an online portal. They have what's kind of known as like an online debit card where they can use to pay for expenses from private school tuition to transportation, tutoring, you know, homeschooling expenses, curriculum, technology, online coursework, and like physical coursework, books, workbooks, that kind of thing. And you can also, the parents can also use it for higher education costs, whether that's within while the student is in school, so like sort of dual enrollment co-curricular higher education expenses, or families who participate can also bank their money. If they don't spend it all in one year, it rolls over to the next, and one of the permissible uses for that is higher education. And families can also use it for enrollment and education at a district public school that is not the resident district of the students. So a family can use voucher funds to pay for courses and tuition at another public school in another district. School voucher, the law, RSA 194F, was passed in 2021 as part of the statewide budget, and the program began enrolling students in the fall 2021-2022 school year. So this is the second year of the program. To be honest, school vouchers the issue has been considered for quite a bit longer. The first education savings account school voucher bill that I'm aware of was introduced in New Hampshire in 2017, 2018. Lawmakers did not move forward with the bill. There was a lot of concern of the effect that it would have on communities, on local property taxpayers, and on schools. So that bill did not come forward. It was resurfaced in 2020, 2021. There was a lot of public opposition to the bill. Thousands of people, really, it was a really historic turnout against school vouchers, bringing them into New Hampshire. But ultimately, lawmakers did pass it as part of the statewide budget. So it was part of this one big package, that big budget, they kind of put it in and passed it that way. So really the technical stuff of how it works is the state sends money to a third-party scholarship organization, which in New Hampshire right now is the Children's Scholarship Fund. And then the Children's Scholarship Fund manages the program, manages the funds, is really the point of contact for both the state when the state wants to know something about the school voucher program, and for families. So families go to the Children's Scholarship Fund to figure out what they can spend money on, how much money they have, all those kinds of things. So that the Children's Scholarship Fund really is the main point and the main administrator of the school voucher program in New Hampshire. In terms of program eligibility, right now, the program eligibility the requirements are that students have to be a school-aged resident of New Hampshire. So that's between the ages of 5 and 20 years old and have not graduated from high school. The other requirement is that they have a family income of less than or 300% of the federal poverty guideline at the time of their application. So we see in this green chart right here, this income eligibility chart, this comes from this year's parent handbook from the Children's Scholarship Fund. So you can see a household size of 4 people, that annual income limit is $79,500. If the family makes that or less, then they would be eligible for the program in that first year. It's important to note here that this income eligibility requirement only applies to the first year that the student participates. Years afterwards, they don't have to meet that income requirement. So, if one year their income is at $79,000, they qualify, and then the following year something happens, and they see a significant boost in their family income. Regardless of what it is, they would continue to qualify and they would continue to be able to participate as long as they are still a school-aged resident, they have not graduated high school, and they live in New Hampshire. The student must reapply every year, but as I had mentioned, the income limit does not apply in subsequent years. Something that's really, really important to note as well, students who are enrolled full-time in charter schools, including VLACs, and students who are enrolled in their resident district school full-time are not eligible. I've been hearing this tossed around quite a bit in different spaces, talking about charter school students and their eligibility. But if they attend a charter school full-time, they are not permitted to participate in the school voucher program. They are not entitled to an education freedom account. They can attend part-time. They can attend their resident district school part-time up to 50%. Once they cross that 50% threshold, either in their resident district school or in a charter school, they are no longer eligible to participate in the program and get those funds. So if we take a look at who is participating, this is the second year of the program, and it's growing pretty substantially. In 2021, there were about 1,600 students who signed up. 17% of them came from public schools, so 280 of those 1,635 came from public schools. The rest were already enrolled in either homeschooling programs or were enrolled in a private school. So we're seeing, the majority of students who are enrolling in the school voucher program had already made that choice to not be enrolled in their public schools. Those families were already outside of the public schools, and now they're receiving funding for that reason. About a little over half of them are eligible for school meals. The FRL stands for free and reduced price lunch. That's a school meal program. So for students who have family incomes of or less than 185% of that federal poverty guideline, they are eligible for school meals. That's really a proxy for poverty in the state. They use that for another, a couple of other school funding related things. So that's a pretty common metric to measure poverty in the state. So we see just over half of them qualify for free and reduced lunch in 2021. 5% of them were eligible for special education, that SE, so 88% of students who enrolled in 2021 were eligible to receive special education services. There were 81 students who were eligible to receive English language learner services, and 3 of those students who participated in 2021 were eligible for what's called the 3rd grade reading non-proficient differential. So it's a very long name. Basically what it means is that when a 3rd grade student takes the statewide reading assessment, if they score that they are not proficient in reading in 3rd grade, and they don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, special education, or English language learner services, there's another state funding for them. It's about $740. So there were 3 students who participated in 2021 that were eligible for that funding as well. In 2022, we saw the program grow pretty significantly to over 3,000 students. A little over half of those had returned from the previous year. 414 of those 3,000 came from public schools. So in 2021, they were enrolled in a public school, and then they disenrolled from their public school and enrolled in the school voucher program. Just about half of them were eligible for school meals, free and reduced lunch. 187 of them were eligible for special education services. 10 students were eligible for English language learner services. And again, 3 were eligible for that 3rd grade reading differential. And so when we look at the trends, when we look at the proportions of students, we see that in 2022, there are fewer students proportionally who are eligible for school meals. So that suggests to us that the students who are enrolling in 2022 fall in the slightly higher income category. So between 185% and 300% of the federal poverty guideline. We also see a significant drop in the proportion of students who are emerging bilingual students, those students who qualify for English language learner services. And that's going to be really important when we talk about one of the bills that lawmakers are considering this year. And then we do see an increase in the proportion of students eligible for special education services. So we see a jump both numerically from 88 to 187, and also proportionally. So in 2021, it was 5% of students. 2022, it was 6% of students. So we're also seeing that bump as well. When we look at the grade breakouts, we see that almost half of them are in elementary school, which I've defined here as K through 4. I know that in New Hampshire, there isn't a sort of set standard for elementary. There are some elementary schools who are K through 4, K through 5, K through 8, but here defined as K through 4, about 47% of students in the school voucher program in 2022 are in elementary school. About a third are in middle school, grades 5 through 8, and then about a fifth are in high school, 9 through 12. When we talk about the amount per voucher, the average school voucher this academic year is about $4,900. But that average, that could go really the minimum is the $3,787. So each student who participates receives that base adequacy grant. And then if they qualify for the free and reduced lunch, they get an additional $1,893. If they qualify for special education services, or if they have a note from a provider that they have a disability or a special learning need, the family receives an additional $2,037. And then for students who are emerging bilingual, they qualify for English language learner services or that third grade reading differential. This is the same amount. It's $741. So what happens is each year, the Children's Scholarship Fund figures out which of these, if a student qualifies, which ones do they qualify for? And then the state deposits the full amount of that grant into the account. Well, they send it to the Children's Scholarship Fund, Children's Scholarship Fund puts it into that account for families. The Children's Scholarship Fund may retain up to 10% of that voucher for administrative purposes. So if a student qualifies only for base adequacy, then the Children's Scholarship Fund can retain $378 for an administrative fee, and then give the rest to the parent and deposit that into their voucher account. And then, like I said, the average amount is $4,900. I will say that these numbers, the base adequacy and then the differentiated aid values, do increase every 2 years because they are tied to the statewide funding formula. So every 2 years, the state takes an inflationary amount and they increase the amount of school funding per student, and that carries over to the voucher program as well. So, last year, I think it was somewhere around $3,600. This year it's $3,787, and then, those slight increases for differentiated aid as well. In terms of where the program is going, so in last fall, late last year, November, December timeframe, state agencies were submitting their state budget requests for this year and the next year. The Department of Education did present to budget writers, and they as part of their state budget request, they included a line for the school voucher program, as they have to because it's one of their programs, it's required. But one thing that we see is that the New Hampshire Department of Education expects that the voucher program will cost $29.8 million in FY24 and $29.8 million in FY25. You'll see that these numbers here, 2023 and 2024, that's the start date of the school year. When we talk about FY, that's the end of the year. So next year they're expecting it to cost about $30 million, and then the following year it's about $30 million. That's significantly more than initially proposed. And it's important to note that really currently the New Hampshire Department of Education can estimate how much the program will cost, but the state is still responsible for 100% of the cost, even if it goes over budget. So the voucher program is unlike a lot of state programs where, there are a number of state programs that say, school building aid is a great one, where the state says up to $50 million, you can't go beyond $50 million. If it's more, then you have to figure it out. The school voucher program, it does not operate like that. Whoever signs up for a voucher, whatever it costs the state, they have to pay that. They are responsible for 100% of the cost. There are no requirements currently that mandate that the program stay within that budget. One thing I do want to note, I've requested this information from the Department of Ed. I haven't heard back yet. Is a question of whether this $30 million per year, what is that based on? Is that based on how the program currently operates? Or is that based on the school voucher eligibility expansion that the Department of Education is requesting? Not sure yet. Once I find out, I will certainly let people know. But even if the expansion doesn't go through, even if lawmakers say no thanks, they've still requested that $29.8 million per year. So, budget writers are still thinking about that and talking it over. So we see that, 2021, $8.1 million, 2022, $14.7 million. And now beyond, we're seeing that the Department of Ed is expecting the program to double in the next biennium. So something
Christina,
certainly to consider.
There was a question in the chat that is worth throwing out there to you. It was in regards to the Children's Scholarship Foundation. The person who asked it mentioned that in Arizona,
Mhm.
their voucher program, the organization who collects administrative fees, collects half the fee that the current Children's Scholarship Fund collects. And they were wondering if proponents for the program have given a reason why the Children's Scholarship Fund takes such a significant cut from the top of the vouchers.
That is a great question, and it's one that I haven't heard an answer to. Arizona and New Hampshire both use a digital platform called ClassWallet, so they use the same digital administration program, but I haven't heard any indication or any rationale as to why that was set at 10%. I'm not quite sure. I can certainly try to find out, but I haven't heard anything. That's a great question, though.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, so in terms of the program and the cost, it's costing the state $14.7 million this year. And it's really important to note that 77% of those public funds are going to students who are already enrolled in private schools and who were homeschooled. They are not people who switched from public schools to a school voucher. They all were already enrolled in these alternatives before. So most of the money we see in New Hampshire is going to families who had already made that choice to leave their public schools. They've already done that. So this, I've heard it referred to over and over again in this light as subsidizing private school and homeschooling, because those families had already made that decision. Over 3/4 of them had already made that decision. So the voucher program is effectively, what we're hearing, is subsidizing those choices. So going over the program accountability right now, there are a lot of concerns with the school voucher program in terms of accountability and transparency. There are currently no provisions in the law that give participating families or the public really any insight into the voucher program's effectiveness on student outcomes, nor is there any transparency concerning the use of taxpayer funds. So students are not required to take the annual statewide assessment. Students in the voucher program they do have to report annually on their academic progress, and that can be done one of three different ways. They can take the annual statewide assessment, but it's not required. They can also take another norm referenced assessment of their choosing, of the family's choosing. It can be any assessment that is norm referenced. They give a number of examples on the Children's Scholarship Fund Parent Handbook, but it's one of those including but not limited to's. And then families can also submit a portfolio to the scholarship organization that shows, this was their reading list, this is what they did over the year. But it's important to know that those, not only can families choose between 3 of those, they don't have to do one specific assessment or anything, but the information goes to the Children's Scholarship Fund. And then the Children's Scholarship Fund reports the aggregate results to the New Hampshire Department of Education. So, and this is really important when we talk about public accountability and when we talk about what we want to know about how effective these programs are, because essentially we're never going to know, because the department won't report small sample sizes and that kind of thing. So if all 3,000 of the students completed the statewide assessment, we might get a better picture of how students are faring, looking at student growth, looking at student proficiency, in the same way that we have that accountability with public district schools and public charter schools. But since there are so many different varieties of ways, those not only are those reported to the Children's Scholarship Fund, but then they're also reported only in aggregate to the New Hampshire Department of Education. It's going to be really hard for the state to really understand how effective this program is. Parents are not required to submit report cards, progress reports, graduation rates, or really any other indicator of academic progress to the state. Like I said, all of it goes to the Children's Scholarship Fund. And then education providers, they're not required to submit any details on program offerings, curriculum practices, or other details. There are some things that they have to report on when they become an approved provider. but there are no limitations in terms of what they can teach and that kind of thing. There are requirements when parents sign up. They say, yes, I promise that I will teach my kid about math, science, history of the Constitution, those kinds of things. But from there, it's really up to the parents to make sure that their students are learning about those required things. And this orange bubble here, I think this is a really important thing. So Dr. Kevin Wellner, he works at the University of Colorado. He studies these issues pretty extensively. And he talks here about transparency and how, we need transparency in order to know if the school, are we providing sufficient information for families to make informed choices? And I think that's really, really important because we hear a lot about, in the State House, I hear this debate around, who's best to make decisions for students. And I think that's a really interesting question. Parents, of course, they know their students. They know how, where their students thrive and everything. But it's really important that these programs have accountability so that parents know, what's happening in this school. How do I know, how can I make informed decisions for my children, for my kids? And so that's really, really important when we think about program accountability. It's not just accountability to taxpayers, it's also accountability to the parents who are participating in these programs. It's really important that they know going in, what is my child going to do? What is my child going to learn? And is this the best fit for my kid? In terms of program accountability, sort of more at a 10,000 foot level, there are a number of things that the state is using. So there is a legislative oversight committee. It is a panel of, I believe, 6 lawmakers, 2 senators, 4 representatives, and they're required to submit an annual report. So they are supposed to meet several times during the year and then submit a report every November-ish on their findings of the program, what have they seen from the program, and then any suggestions for improvements to the law or whatever it is. Their last meeting was in March 2022. They haven't had one since, and they don't have one scheduled. So, there is this requirement of an oversight committee, but it is largely inactive. I've been hearing a lot of questions about when this committee will meet again. In March 2022, they were really basically looking at 6 or so months of the program implementation. And since then, there's been more than a year of program implementation. So we know a lot more, and so where are we going? Where can the state improve? But they haven't met since March 2022. Last year, lawmakers did pass a law that requires a performance audit. That requires the state legislative budget assistant to look at how the New Hampshire Department of Education is monitoring access to the program, monitoring spending within the program. So what are parents spending these funds on, and are they appropriate uses? And then monitoring the phase-out grants. So a little bit of background on the phase-out grants. When a student leaves public school for a school voucher, that public school receives half of the adequacy grant. For the first year, 25% the second year, and then it phases out to nothing. But it helps to, it's intended to help to ease the transition in state funding for local school districts. That program will, however, sunset in 2025. So after 2025, no more phase out grants. One of the other things, and you can see it, I'm tending to put my quotes here in these little bubbles, but in this blue bubble, this was something that Kate Baker Demers, who's the executive director with the Children's Scholarship Fund, she told a panel of lawmakers just last week. The lawmakers, they held a hearing on voucher expansion bills, and there were a lot of questions, both within the committee and within the public, around accountability. And Kate had talked, she had testified, and she had said how upset she was that the New Hampshire Department of Education hasn't given lawmakers any of those reports, whether they were fiscal reports, vendor reports, expense reports. And she had told lawmakers that she's going to be putting together a packet for them with this information within the next month. So we'll be looking out for that. But it's been, we heard from the public and we heard from lawmakers on that committee last week that there's a lot of concern that really the state doesn't know and the public doesn't know what's happening with these funds, where are the funds going, and that kind of thing. So that's something that's emerging as well. And then in terms of student and family protections, so the current law, this is an issue. It's really big, both within New Hampshire and in other states. So there are a number of other states who have school voucher programs, and there is a lot of concern around the lack of student and family protections. So New Hampshire's law protects educational service providers from being discriminated against based on their religious affiliation. However, students and families aren't really afforded the same umbrella of protection. So education service providers have to comply with all applicable anti-discrimination laws. I put applicable here in italics because in the state law, it says they have to comply with anti-discrimination laws, but private schools in particular have a lot of carve-outs for anti-discrimination laws. So private schools cannot discriminate based on race, color, or national origin. That is, to be a nonprofit, that is a requirement from the IRS. However, federal rules regarding discrimination on the basis of sex, which is Title IX, sexual orientation, or religion, and a lot of laws around disability, they don't apply to private schools that do not accept federal funds. So this means that private schools that accept taxpayer-funded school vouchers, they're not necessarily required to accept students based on their LGBTQ status, based on their religion. They can deny admission based on those pieces. There are requirements around students with disabilities, but private schools, they're not required to make the same accommodations that public schools are. And there are a lot of concerns that school voucher programs, they don't adequately inform parents of changes in those protections for students with disabilities. And so, there's a lot of concern that when a family signs up for a school voucher and their student has an IEP in their public school, does the family really know what changes are going to, what changes in both the protections and in the services are going to happen if they disenroll from their public schools? And so just a quick thing from the National Education Policy Center, one of their recommendations was that state legislatures should include explicit anti-discrimination language in their voucher laws, so that to make sure that private schools that are participating and receive state funding from vouchers, they don't discriminate, based on any of the protected classes. So I think that's something that's really important, and something that's really been a very big concern of a lot of New Hampshire general public. So next, we're going to go into school voucher programs and the effects on students and communities. So there's quite a bit of research on the impact of school voucher programs on student outcomes. What's important here, though, is to know that the research that we are including and the research that we are looking at is not sponsored by or affiliated with any sort of organization. A lot of these studies are peer reviewed. Some of them have been in academic journals. They are not affiliated with pro-privatization interest groups, or they're not affiliated with any other groups. They are straight up research. They are looking at they're peer reviewed, that kind of thing. And I think that's really important, because we hear a lot about research, and particularly research that talks about the benefits of school vouchers and privatization efforts. But looking at the research, a lot of that is either sponsored by or actually done by pro-privatization interest groups. So looking at just straight up peer-reviewed research, these kinds of studies, they consistently suggest that vouchers have either statistically insignificant, meaning zero, or negative effects on student outcomes. So in Louisiana students who were using school vouchers to attend private schools performed noticeably worse on state assessments than their public school counterparts. In Alabama, their tax credit voucher found that scholarship recipients generally performed below the US average student at their grade level. And then in Indiana, a study of the Indiana voucher program found significant losses in academic achievement for students who moved from public school to private schools. And so, you know, there's been some research over the past 10 or so years, and it's really found pretty much the same, these same findings. And so, you know, when we think about where we can most effectively target our scarce state resources to really help all students thrive, there have been a number of studies that indicate that our state funding would be really best spent in our public schools and supporting and strengthening these schools with a menu of proven policies, whether that's early childhood education, after school programs, those kinds of things, that they really yield higher returns than the either minor and significantly like zero gains that have been estimated for school voucher students. And so looking at, you know, the effects on the communities. So the majority of New Hampshire families, they already choose and they continue to choose public schools for their children. 9 out of every 10 New Hampshire children attend a public school, whether that's a neighborhood district school or a public charter school. This breakout has really been consistent for years, especially as enrollment in both public and private schools has steadily declined. So even with slight declines in public school and private school enrollment over the past 2 decades, proportionally, most students are still continuing to choose public schools. This year, as of October 2022, 86% of students attend a public district school, 9% of students attend a private school, and then 3% of students attend a public charter school, and 2% are homeschooled. And so when we think about where the majority of our students go, and we think about our really scarce resources, we're finding that school voucher programs, they do drain funds from public schools. We've heard this from other states. We've heard this right here in New Hampshire. And this is a fact that's continually disputed. But I think that this example is really important. So in 2022, just last year, lawmakers killed a request. Somebody had proposed an amendment that would increase special education funding this year in FY23 because they didn't believe that the Education Trust Fund could support that request. It was about $14 million. This year, the year that would have been, school vouchers cost the state $14.8 million. So $14.8 million from the Education Trust Fund that could have supported that increase in special education funding that went to school vouchers. And so that's just one example, and the program is fairly new, and we're going into a new budget year, a budget biennium with this program in place, and with the department having requested $60 million for it over the next biennium. I think that's really going to change the calculus of how people start to think about funding, what they're willing to fund, even when it comes to things like school building aid and those kinds of things. This sentiment happened last year, 2022. They didn't believe that the Education Trust Fund could support it. And I'm going to be really interested to see if that same logic is going to be applied to other requests like school building aid, other infrastructure programs, school safety grants, that kind of thing, targeted aid, while these school vouchers really have an unlimited funding stream. So as I had said, the New Hampshire Department of Education, they're requesting $60 million in the next biennium for school vouchers. And this was really salient to people at the last budget time. And so I figured I would redo it. So what else could the state fund with that $60 million? They could restore targeted aid so that schools can better meet their students' needs. So that would be about $70 million. This is that enhanced free and reduced lunch program that's being considered right now. They could provide more state funding for special education services. They could do that, what they said they couldn't do last year. They could bring that back, $28 million over the biennium to provide school districts with more funding for special education. They could provide recruitment incentives for 3,000 teachers. That would be about $60 million. They are, lawmakers are considering a bill right now that would start recruitment incentives for teachers who teach in rural and underserved areas. So you could have recruitment incentives for 3,000 teachers to really help ease the state's workforce shortage, teacher shortage. You can fund building renovations in 10 school districts. So in November, the State Board of Education approved the school building aid list, and there are 10 districts there that requested building renovations. They could fund it $48 million, and they could also employ 600 additional mental health counselors in schools. That would be about $60 million. You know, that's really important. We know that as students come back, and students today, they are facing significant mental health challenges. So having extra staff in schools could really help them. And so really just thinking about this program and really putting it into context, I think is really important. And this is, you know, just to refresh everyone's memory, because it's relevant to the next slide. You know, 77% of these public funds are going to students who are already enrolled in private schools, who are already homeschooled. And I think that's critically important, because when we hear conversations about school vouchers, both in New Hampshire and nationally, supporters of school vouchers often talk about the cost savings that they expect to see in local school districts. But projections, you know, related to cost savings of voucher programs, they're really difficult to do with any degree of accuracy. And supporters talk about, you know, a drop in the number of students could translate to cost savings and greater efficiency. I see a number of people who say, you know, if 3 students leave your school for a school voucher, then, you know, schools have that much more per student to use, but it doesn't work that way. History shows that more often municipalities raise tax rates, they cut programming, and they cut staffing when they lose that state funding. So if a school is losing, you know, 3, 4, 5 students per year for school vouchers, and those students are disenrolling and taking a school voucher, that school is losing out on that state aid, that state funding, but they have the same building that they have to maintain. You know, if you lose 1 or 2 students in a classroom, you're not going to lay off a teacher. You know, you can't cut staff, those kinds of things. And so really what happens is that municipalities have to adjust in other ways. And by focusing resources on school voucher expansion, I'm talking specifically this year, a lot of lawmakers' attention is on school voucher expansion. When they're talking about that, instead of equitable, adequate public education resourcing, adequate school funding, districts are forced to make tough decisions. They raise property taxes, they cut teacher and para positions, they eliminate academic and extracurricular programs. And I mean, I can drop the links. I didn't make this up. I lifted them from news articles from around the state. This is how school districts are forced to deal with our current school funding climate. And really, lawmakers are talking about vouchers. They're talking about expanding the program. They're not, you know, not a lot of them are talking about all of these other things and talking about, you know, where should our public funding go? And so when we think about school vouchers and the progression of the program, and really what the state is talking about now compared to what they were talking about 5 years ago, I've seen this emergence of really a 2-tiered education system. So you have a school voucher system that has, you know, those unlimited funds. It has no accountability or transparency. We don't know the effects that it has on student outcomes. It's really just, okay, well, the state sees that these parents signed up for this program, give them their funds, they can do whatever it is that they want with it. And then we have this public education system, this really large system, 9 in 10 students go to it. It is designed for communities, by communities, for students. It is accountable to their communities and to their state. We see that it's largely inequitably and inadequately funded. That is, I mean, we've been talking about this for decades. This is not new news here. There have been lawsuits. There's been so much conversation around how problematic our school funding formula is. And then we also see our public education system increasingly undermined and really targeted, and really the target of ideological attacks in the variety of forms that it's taking. So we see, you know, this really broad effort to have this two-tiered system. And I think that this is really important to consider as we move forward. And so looking at what's next for New Hampshire, what are lawmakers considering? What are we thinking about for the next year? What are lawmakers looking at? We know that there's a school voucher lawsuit. So this lawsuit was brought forth. It challenges the statewide school voucher program. It says that it delegates the state's responsibility to educate children. There's a constitutional responsibility that the state provides an adequate education for students, but it delegates that to a third-party independent company. The argument in the lawsuit is that that is unconstitutional, and that it is an illegal and improper use of the Education Trust Fund dollars. So right now, the state statute for the Education Trust Fund says that it can only be used to fund public school adequacy, charter schools, school building aid, and then a number of other public education related expenses. There is a bill now, I think it's House Bill 440, but that bill would add school vouchers into that RSA. But this lawsuit right now says that having school vouchers and funding it from the Education Trust Fund is an illegal and improper use of that fund. And there are a number of bills around expansion. So House Bill 464, it would expand the school voucher program to these categories, regardless of income. So right now, if a student falls under these categories and they also fall within the income eligibility category, they qualify. In fact, there were 3 students, I believe, in foster care who participated in the voucher program last year. But this really expands it quite a bit. So all children who have a quote child with a disability, and I put that in quotes, so they receive special education services regardless of income, they would qualify. Multilingual students would qualify regardless of income. And that was really interesting because the first year we saw, I believe it was about 81 students who receive ELL services enrolled in the voucher program last year. This year, that number dropped to 10. So there's a sharp reduction in the number of multilingual students who are enrolled in school vouchers. So that's an interesting addition. Eligible for school meals. This one's also interesting because right now, eligibility for school meals is less than 185% of the federal poverty guideline. The existing income requirement is less than 300%. So right now, inherently, if students are eligible for school meals, they're eligible income-wise for the program anyway. But I think the most impactful expansion here are the lives within a geographic boundary of a continuous support and improvement school. So these are schools that are designated every 3 years by the New Hampshire Department of Education. They have, compared to the rest of the state, low graduation rates. They have low student outcomes on statewide assessments and that kind of thing. But the geographic boundary is really, really interesting because that would expand the program pretty significantly. So right now, cities that have a CSI designated school are Manchester, Nashua, and Franklin. Towns are Barnstead, Farmington, Marlborough, Middleton, Milton, Newport, Groveton, Pittsburgh, and Pittsfield. So it's unclear. It's our read right now that all of the students who live in those towns, whether or not they attend a CSI school would be eligible. So all students in Manchester would, as I read, that they would be eligible whether or not they go to Manchester West, which is the CSI designated school. What's also really interesting about this is that about 8 of the 23 CSI designated schools are charter schools. So Concord, Keene, Lebanon, Derry, Conway, they all have CSI designated charter schools. So it's unclear if students in Concord, because that they're in that geographic area, would they be eligible for a school voucher, whether or not they were enrolled in that charter school. That's something that's been unclear. And I didn't hear any clarification on that in the public hearing, but that's something that we're really curious about. So it's our estimate that there are about 26,351 students in towns designated with a CSI school. And then there are an additional 13,000 students in towns that have a CSI designated charter school. So Concord, Keene, Lebanon, Derry, Conway, that's an additional 13,000 students. So this could expand the program pretty significantly to about 40,000 additional students. That is quite large when you consider that the current enrollment rate is about 3,000 students this year. So House Bill 464 did have a public hearing last week. It does have an executive session, I believe, next week on the 1st. So we'll be watching that pretty closely. Some other bills that are being proposed to expand the school voucher program, House Bill 367, that would about double, or by our estimates, it would double the number of students eligible. It would make it to be greater than or less than 500%, or sorry, less than or equal to 500% of the federal poverty guideline, which is about $150,000 for a family of 4. That would nearly double eligibility. It did have a public hearing last week, and it has an executive session scheduled for next week, February 1st. And then House Bill 331 would remove income eligibility entirely, making the only 2 eligibility requirements is being a New Hampshire resident and being of school age and not having graduated high school yet. That one does not have a hearing yet, but I mean, it would be an enormous expansion of the program. You know, thinking about, we have about 16,000 private school students, about 3,500 homeschool students. All of those students would be eligible, so that would be a significant cost to the state. So House Bill 538, this has to do with locally funded school vouchers. Last year, lawmakers considered House Bill 607, which was a locally funded school voucher program. This is by the same sponsor. It is tweaked a little bit. What it does is establishes a locally funded school voucher program. So these funds would come directly from district budgets. Eligible students would be attending their local public school, a charter school, or a kindergarten student, or are homeschooled. So that eligibility is a bit more stringent than the current statewide school voucher program. If a district did want to do this, it would require a 3/5 majority vote on a school warrant article. So voters would have to approve it. And then if they reach that 3/5 majority vote, then the district could have this locally funded school voucher program. In terms of the amount, this is where the biggest change is. The voucher would be twice the per pupil adequate education grant per student, including differentiated aid. So in a previous slide, we saw that the base adequacy was about $3,700. This voucher would be twice that. So it would be, oh my goodness, forgive my math, about $7,400 plus any differentiated aid. And that would come directly from the school district budget. School district would pay that directly. The idea with how the bill was written is that the school district would still receive state adequate education dollars for that student. So they would receive that fund, those funds would go to the voucher. And then the thought behind it is that it would be a matching state local grant in a voucher for students. This one also doesn't have a public hearing yet, but once it does, we will for sure be doing some research on it. And then just to close up, we have a couple of other school voucher bills. House Bill 573 would limit the funding for school vouchers to budgeted amounts. So that would be, if the $29.8 million per year passed the legislature, then that would be the maximum amount for that year. House Bill 626 would require the New Hampshire Department of Education to administer the statewide voucher program. So it would move from the Children's Scholarship Fund to the New Hampshire Department of Education. And then House Bill 515, that would allow school voucher funds, to be used to pay for courses at public schools. It does a number of other things. It adds intentional to the misuse statute. So right now it's families who substantially misuse their voucher funds would get in trouble. This would add intentional and substantial to that misuse threshold. And that's a really important change because, we had talked about this 2 years ago where intentional was in there. And lawmakers had talked about how big of a barrier that proving the intentionality is. And so they changed it to substantial. This would change it to intentional and substantial. And then it adds some reporting requirements and some other kind of requirements. House Bill 626 did already have a public hearing. The other two have not had public hearings yet. So stay tuned. We will be sharing information as we get it. And then two other bills, there's a House bill and a Senate bill, and they do pretty much the same thing. SB 141 and HB 430, that would limit eligibility to students who are attending public schools for at least a year or who are entering kindergarten or first grade. So that would be, that would limit eligibility pretty substantially. And, it would bring the cost down quite a bit as well. Those bills, House Bill 430 did have a public hearing last week. SB 141 has not had a public hearing scheduled, but again, stay tuned. Our website, New Hampshire Education Network, will get that information out as it comes. And then finally, talking a little bit about how to participate. So in the past couple of years, the state has had this online portal, which has been really, really great. It's removed a lot of barriers for people, which has been really exciting. So if you want to participate, you can go in person at the location of the public hearing. Usually hearings are held at the Legislative Office building, which is behind the State House. It's a really cool gray building. The Education Committee room is on the second floor. The Senate Education Committee room is on the first floor, but both in that building, that's where most of them are. You can go in, you can testify in person. You can submit written testimony to the House Education Committee or through the portal. So you can email them directly, or you can submit it through the portal, or you can now support or oppose bills without written testimony. So if you want to say like, I don't want to write anything, but I do want to say, yes, I support it, or yes, I oppose it. You can do that as well. And it's right on the online portal. All of this information is on our website, and we have a weekly legislative update that I also email out to our New Hampshire Education Network members. So what we do is we really just distill information, tell you how you can participate in that kind of thing. So those are the big pieces. And as we wrap up here, just a plug for that New Hampshire Education Network. It's been a really great resource for people. It's exploded in the past couple of weeks, which has been very exciting. But every week, every Monday, we send out an email of, the top couple of things to know about the week, a schedule of public hearings that week, and other legislative happenings, and then really some context in terms of here are the big issues and here's what you need to know. So I would encourage people to sign up for it if you're interested in these and other topics. It's bit.ly/NHEdNetwork. And with that, closing out with just a minute to spare, my name is Christina Pretorius. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or comments. This will be made available on our website and on YouTube. So catch us there. And if you have any questions, just reach out and ask. And with that, I hope everyone has a great day.